In this video, we will be tasting and talking about batch 90 of the Eco-Cha Tea Club, an Eco-Farmed GABA Oolong Tea from Taiwan. Batch 90 of the Eco-Cha Tea Club is an Eco-Farmed GABA Oolong Tea from Taiwan, specifically Songbo-ling in Nantou County. It's our source of our regular selection of GABA Oolong Tea, our in-store selection. But the difference between our in-store selection and this batch of tea that we are sharing with the Tea Club this month is that this batch is hand-picked. That's the biggest difference anyway. It's made from organically certified 4-season spring oolong. By the way, eco-farmed is the word that we have coined to designate teas that are sourced from certified organic farms. We do not represent the organic certification, we just represent the tea and the people who produce it. This batch of GABA Oolong Tea was hand-picked and picked immaturely, basically the standard for black tea, as our source told us, meaning that it's 2 leaves in a bud, not larger, longer, with more stem material. Our in-store selection is machine harvested with a hedge trimmer, basically, and that would be much longer with more stem material, which is actually fine for making GABA tea because it is fully oxidized and it has been manipulated enough that using larger leaf material is okay. But using smaller leaf material that's young and juicy, freshly grown, just the new growth on the branch, makes the best quality overall. And hand picking it is a much more selective process, obviously, than machine harvesting. So these leaves were harvested in September 2022. The thing about GABA, GABA, G-A-B-A, is an abbreviated word for the much longer term gamma amino butyric acid. And it's actually a compound in our human bodies and is the main neurotransmitter that is responsible for the calming effect. After we are basically been fight or flight stimulated in some way, this neurotransmitter is responsible for calming us back down physically in our nervous system. And a Japanese researcher came up with a way to process tea leaves, basically oxidizing them in an oxygen-free environment. It sounds like an oxymoron, but basically a vacuum, taking all the air out. You can also, our source, depending on the conditions and the volume that they're doing, has these large steel drums that are equipped with a vacuum valve, basically taking all the air out of it, and he can pump nitrogen into the tanks as well. That's not necessary, you just need to remove the air and have it oxidize in an anaerobic environment. But basically, the effect of this processing is to increase the naturally occurring amount of GABA many-fold. So you're getting a much higher concentration of gamma amino butyric acid. And this Japanese scientist's hypothesis is that ingesting GABA will allow us to have a calming effect on our body. From the research that I personally have done, there is some conflicting ideas about that, whether we can ingest this compound and have it have a similar effect to our brain initiating the production of it within our bodies is not completely proven, as far as I know personally, which isn't so much. Okay, back to the tea. So it's a tea that is proclaimed to have a calming effect. There are lots of customer reviews and proclamations that ingesting GABA does help people sleep better, have more normal sleep patterns, lowers their blood pressure, and so on. The tea itself is processed as an oolong. In other words, there are oolong processing methods implemented to make this tea, but it is basically fully oxidized. So it's the most oxidized oolong And oolong, by our working definition, is partially oxidized tea. So that's another slight contradiction in the terminology here. We call it an oolong because of the way it is made. There is solar withering, there is indoor withering, extensive indoor withering, extensive oxidation within this anaerobic environment, and a lot of tumbling to basically break up the cell walls within the leaves and allow those chemical compounds to mix and interact with each other while maintaining the integrity of the leaf. So the difference between this, and it's a very fundamental difference between oolong making and black tea making in general, is that oolong tea, the leaves are still intact. With black tea, they roll it vigorously and the leaves are torn so that the sap comes out of the leaf and is exposed to air. That's the purpose behind rolling and making of black tea, in order to fully oxidize them. So this is a very time-consuming and labor-intensive process. Mostly time-consuming, but it's just a matter of moving the leaves from one step to the other and transporting them and shuffling them to an extent. So it's an oolong in every way, except that it reaches near or full oxidation, which by some definitions would be a black tea. I'm going to taste this. The prominent note is tangy, sweet, fruity. This is cooled down to room temperature. I put 10 grams of tea leaves in this 175, 180 milliliter teapot. I started brewing at 1 minute for the first and second brews, 1 minute 30 seconds for the third and fourth brew, and then 2 minutes for the fifth brew. The brewing leaves, while they were brewing and steaming, gave off an amazing, what I thought of was caramelized pears, or at least stewed pears with added sweetener. A kind of delicate fruity note, but very distinctive sweet fruity factor in the aroma. I'm not getting much off the cold pot now. Almost every time I drink GABA, I think of papayas, and usually dried papaya. It's more of a concentrated, sweet papaya flavor with some tang in there. I also think of dried apricots. It's got a really nice oolong character in its dry finish. So this tangy, sweet flavor profile pops upon swallowing the tea. It's a very nice soft mouthfeel. There is a touch of astringency. You can experiment with less of a leaf to water ratio and probably get a more aromatic profile. Brewing with less leaves and also possibly brewing with a little lower temperature brings out the delicacies or the subtleties in the tea more. Brewing with more leaves and a higher temperature and also potentially more brewing time will concentrate it, obviously, and make it a denser, more balanced perhaps, or at least integrated flavor profile. But it's harder to distinguish among the spectrum of flavor notes that you can get when you brew more lightly. It's a really pleasant, fruity flavored tea. It reminds me of fruit punch. And in that sense, it makes a really good cold brew or iced tea. So we encourage you to try it in both of those forms as well. You can just throw in 5 grams of tea leaves into a liter of water, brew it at room temperature for a couple of hours and drink it, or refrigerate it, or put it in the fridge overnight and it will be ready to drink in the morning. Iced tea, brew it a little bit, brew it hot, let it cool down a little bit more concentrated because you're going to add a lot of ice. The source. These are the most innovative and pioneering organic tea farmers that we have met here in our 20 plus years. roaming around the tea country in Taiwan. They started doing things almost 20 years ago that nobody had even heard of, no less tried. So we really admire the husband of this couple, especially for his vision and his tenacity. He had to do a lot of trial and error. It wasn't easy. He basically does radical farming, or relatively radical farming methods, in that he doesn't irrigate his plants after they are grown enough to have a root structure anyway. And he doesn't administer any fertilizers. He just uses mulch. He doesn't cut the weeds in between the rows of tea. He pushes them down with a hand truck in order to maintain the integrity of the ecosystem. He's trying to really allow an ecosystem to develop and remain intact throughout a yearly cycle of his farming practice. So the weeds that aren't cut are allowed to maintain moisture in the soil more effectively, and just in an organic farming environment, it's important to have an ecosystem so that the bugs aren't targeting the crop that you are trying to grow. So that has been effective after many years of working it out, and they're doing quite well. They make many different kinds of teas. And there were also, in our experience at least, we don't know anyone who started making GABA as early as they had. So it's been about 10 years of developing their GABA tea making skills. Well, they kind of like nailed it within 5 years, I think. And we've been sourcing this type of tea from them for several years now. And we like to share their they only do one hand-picked crop a year. It's very small. Yeah, it's like some of the smallest batches of tea that are made in our experience. So we make a point of asking them if we can have our share each year to share exclusively with the tea club. Check it out. Eco-Farmed GABA Oolong Tea from Songboling, Nantou County, harvested in September of 2022. Oh, we should note that this type of heavily or fully oxidized tea does the best when it's allowed to sit for a good several months, 6 months. So this has been over 8 months now. Yeah, 8, close to 10 months. And they also intentionally rolled the leaves the way they did in order for post-oxidation to have the optimal effect. In other words, to leave as much surface area of the leaf material exposed so that it can transform after it's already dried. Post-oxidation is a real thing. It's something fundamental to raw pu'er and other aged teas. There we have it, an organic crop of 4-season spring oolong made into GABA tea. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next month.